Picture an open wooden ship, no cabin, no walls, no roof, crashing through freezing North Atlantic waves in the dead of winter. Spray from the sea freezes solid the moment it hits exposed skin. The air temperature alone could kill an unprotected person in under an hour, and the water below is even colder, cold enough to stop a human heart in minutes. There was no fire on these voyages. Open flame on a wooden ship surrounded by rope, sail, and dry timber was practically a death sentence of its own. And yet, Viking sailors regularly crossed some of the most brutal seas on Earth, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America, centuries before anyone else in Europe dared attempt it. No thermal layers, no waterproof jackets, no modern insulation technology of any kind. So how did they survive weeks at sea, freezing, wet, and completely exposed, without a single flame to warm themselves? The answer involves ingenious clothing technology, brutal physical conditioning, clever ship design, and a tolerance for suffering that modern humans can barely comprehend. Let's climb aboard and find out how they actually did it. The single most important piece of Viking survival technology wasn't a weapon or a tool. It was wool, and understanding exactly why reveals just how sophisticated their clothing really was. Unlike cotton or linen, wool retains a significant portion of its insulating power, even when completely soaked through with freezing seawater. The natural crimp in wool fibers traps countless tiny pockets of air against the skin, and those air pockets continue providing insulation even when the outer fibers are wet, because wool can absorb up to a third of its own weight in moisture before it even begins to feel damp to the touch. Vikings layered wool obsessively, undergarments woven tightly for a base layer, followed by looser, thicker woolen tunics and cloaks on top, trapping multiple layers of warm air between each garment. Many outer garments were also treated with raw lanolin, the natural waxy oil still present in unwashed sheep's wool, which added a genuine layer of water resistance on top of the fiber's already impressive insulating properties. Beyond wool itself, the actual construction of Viking cold weather clothing reveals centuries of hard-won trial and error passed down through generations of sailors who depended on getting it exactly right. Sailors commonly wore multiple tunics layered directly against each other, sometimes 3 or 4 at once, each one trapping another pocket of warm, insulating air between the layers. Outer cloaks were frequently fastened with large decorative brooches positioned specifically at the shoulder, allowing sailors to quickly adjust or completely remove a soaked outer layer without exposing their entire body to the brutal wind in the process. Some Norse sailors also wore garments made from sealskin or other treated animal hides layered over their wool, since these materials offered genuine water resistance that plant fibers like linen simply couldn't match in freezing marine conditions. Even Viking footwear reflected this same obsessive layering logic, with wool socks worn underneath leather shoes that were regularly treated with animal fat to help repel water and slow the punishing effects of the cold. The famous Viking longship wasn't just built for speed and raiding. Its very design incorporated genuine survival features that modern historians are still fully appreciating today. The low, narrow hull design meant sailors sat remarkably close to the waterline, which sounds dangerous, but actually reduced the ship's exposure to harsh, biting wind compared to taller vessel designs used elsewhere in medieval Europe at the time. Overlapping wooden planks, a construction method known as clinker building, created a genuinely flexible hull that could absorb and distribute the punishing force of massive waves rather than breaking apart under that same brutal repeated stress. Sailors often used the ship's sail itself as makeshift emergency shelter, rigging it up at an angle to block wind and freezing spray during the absolute worst stretches of any given storm. Wooden storage chests doubled as improvised rowing benches, keeping men elevated slightly above pooling, freezing water that regularly collected in the bottom of the hull during rough ocean crossings. Despite every clever precaution available to them, Viking sailors still faced a constant, ever-present threat of hypothermia on every single voyage they ever undertook. Cold water pulls heat away from the human body roughly 25 times faster than air of the exact same freezing temperature, which meant even brief accidental immersion during rough seas could prove fatal within minutes if a sailor wasn't pulled from the water immediately. Norse sagas describe sailors developing early, unmistakable warning symptoms, violent, uncontrollable shivering, slurred, confused speech, and severe disorientation, symptoms modern medicine would immediately recognize as textbook progressive hypothermia. Experienced crew members learned to closely watch each other for these exact warning signs, since a hypothermic sailor often couldn't recognize the danger in their own rapidly deteriorating condition. The standard treatment, when available, involved huddling desperately close together for shared body heat and wrapping the affected sailor in every single dry piece of wool the crew could possibly gather. Hypothermia deaths were tragically common on longer voyages, and many sailors who set out for Greenland or Vinland simply never returned home at all. Without fire for cooking during most of any given voyage, Viking sailors relied heavily on foods specifically chosen for their ability to generate genuine body heat and sustain grueling physical effort over many freezing days at sea. Dried fish, particularly stockfish, cod preserved through careful air drying rather than salting or smoking, provided dense, easily portable protein that required absolutely no cooking preparation whatsoever. Skyr, a thick strained dairy product similar to modern yogurt, offered concentrated fat and protein in a form that traveled remarkably well without any refrigeration technology at all. Sailors also consumed significant quantities of butter and animal fat directly, since fat contains more than double the caloric density of protein or carbohydrates, and that extra caloric density translated directly into more internal heat generation for a body working desperately hard to maintain its core temperature. Mead and weak ale provided some hydration and calories as well, though sailors generally avoided drinking to excess, since alcohol actually accelerates dangerous heat loss from the human body rather than helping to prevent it. When the cold became truly unbearable, Viking sailors turned to one of humanity's oldest and most effective survival strategies, deliberately huddling together for shared body heat. Crews slept in tight, densely packed groups beneath thick woolen blankets and animal hide coverings, sometimes stacking multiple layers of both people and fabric together for maximum warmth retention. This wasn't merely comfort-seeking, it was calculated, practical survival math. The human body radiates a genuinely significant amount of heat, and clustering several bodies tightly together dramatically reduces the total exposed surface area from which that precious heat can escape into the freezing air. Ship crews also frequently rotated exposed rowing positions throughout each watch, ensuring no single sailor faced the harshest, most brutal wind and spray for too long without a scheduled break to warm back up. Leadership positions came with real responsibility here too. Experienced captains carefully monitored their crew for early warning signs of dangerous cold exposure, since losing even a single sailor to hypothermia could seriously threaten the survival of an entire voyage. Surviving the brutal cold meant absolutely nothing if a ship couldn't successfully find its way across thousands of miles of open, freezing ocean, and Vikings developed remarkably sophisticated navigation techniques for their era. Sailors read wave patterns, prevailing wind directions, and the specific flight paths of seabirds to help estimate their position when landmarks were completely absent from view. A mysterious tool called a sunstone, likely a crystal capable of polarizing scattered sunlight, may have helped Norse sailors locate the sun's position even through thick cloud cover or dense fog, though modern historians still debate its precise practical use today. Experienced Viking navigators also carefully tracked water temperature and color changes, along with the specific behavior of marine wildlife, to help estimate their proximity to unseen land masses. Getting lost in genuinely freezing waters wasn't just inconvenient for these crews, it was often fatal, since extra unplanned days at sea meant additional exposure, dwindling food supplies, and a rapidly shrinking margin for any kind of survivable error. Vikings weren't naturally immune to cold through some kind of special genetic advantage. They endured it through relentless exposure, brutal conditioning, and simple hard-won physical adaptation built up over a lifetime. Archaeological evidence from Norse burial sites reveals significant skeletal signs of repeated cold stress and old, healed frostbite damage among individuals who clearly worked as regular seafarers. Norse children were routinely exposed to harsh cold conditions from a remarkably young age, gradually building genuine physical tolerance that most modern humans, raised almost entirely indoors, would find absolutely unbearable by comparison. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, and sometimes entire limbs among sailors who spent extended time at sea. In severe cases, could easily turn fatal without any modern medical intervention available to treat them. Despite this harsh physical toll, Vikings continued making dangerous winter crossings anyway, driven by trade opportunities, exploration, and simple economic necessity that simply couldn't wait for warmer, safer seasons to arrive. Viking survival at sea wasn't magic, and it definitely wasn't luck. It was centuries of accumulated wool technology, clever ship engineering, careful food science, and hard-earned physical endurance, all working together toward a single shared goal, keeping sailors alive without a single flame to warm them through the very worst of it. Every technique we've covered today, from lanolin-treated cloaks to huddled sleeping formations to fat-rich foods built for generating body heat, represents genuine hard-won knowledge passed down across countless generations of sailors who had absolutely no margin whatsoever for error. But it's also worth remembering the sailors who didn't make it home, the ones hypothermia quietly claimed in the middle of the freezing open ocean, far from shore and completely beyond any hope of rescue. Next time you complain about a cold walk to your car in winter, remember, there was once a seafaring people who crossed entire frozen oceans in open wooden boats, wrapped in nothing more than wool, fat, and sheer collective determination. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Viking survival, make sure to subscribe for more buried and forgotten stories from history. See you in the next one.